Hi, welcome to the Red Adventuring in AI sessions. So a little bit about the Red Foundation. What we're trying to do at Red is really help promote the adoption and the understanding of AI across the real estate spectrum. And today, I'm very excited to have a chat with the OG of AI in real estate, Tripty. Tripty, I don't know if you want to give yourself an introduction.
I don't know. I probably wouldn't start with OG, but yes, this is me. It is not my AI avatar, so we can definitely say I think that's my new way of using the word OG. It is originally human Tripty. Um, so I guess a quick introduction about me. I'm the CEO of a company called Travtus, and we are an AI platform for real estate operations. The problem that we've been trying to solve for a while, which is your polite way of saying OG, what he means is you've just been doing this really long, Tripty, is we're still solving for the problem of how do you make real estate operations scalable. And that's where I think the advances in machine learning have been so exciting, because that makes that large problem a lot more bite-sized now. And we work mostly with multifamily owner-operators in the US. We have about 500,000 units that actively use our platform. And more importantly, clients who are actively transforming their business to actually be able to adopt AI. So that's the part which we find obviously the most exciting. Our whole team is based in the UK, with the exception of sales. And it's always great to bring British engineering to America.
That's amazing, yeah. Because so you started. Well, there's a couple of things I noticed there in that a bit. So I noticed first of all you called it machine learning, not AI. So that was that a deliberate?
Always
Yeah,
deliberate.
yeah. Okay. Why is that?
Well, I think AI has become such a buzzword. And frankly, people use it for anything. And I think trying to explain what we do, it's important to use the right vocabulary, and which is why I say machine learning, because very often it's a subtle way of telling people that we need to talk beyond just AI as some magical unicorn, because I think people are still confusing code with machine learning. And frankly, all of that is AI. Because we can't say that, oh, actually, code is not AI. There's so many components in everything we do with tech, which will fall within the definition of artificial intelligence, but not everything falls within the definition of machine learning, which is why we try to make that distinction, at least while we're talking about it. I don't think people calling it AI is wrong. It just doesn't mean they're being specific enough in the tool set that we're using.
Nice. Yeah, makes sense. There's another thing in that bit that I'm really interested in. So obviously, I think when we first met, the company was focused on, well, it wasn't necessarily just purely focused on the US, from what I recall. I think you were also looking at the UK.
Yep.
Really interested to understand. Obviously, that puts you in quite an interesting, unique position. Why? What's the difference between the two kind of marketplaces, and what is the yeah? So what's the difference between the markets, and why US?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's funny, I never get that question in the US. They're like, of course you're here.
Yeah,
And I always get that question when I'm not in the US. So I think, look, everyone's decisions comes from a few things. It comes from the market you're in. It comes from which stage the business is in. There's all of these different conditions that come together for somebody to take as informed a decision as possible. And our decision to go to the US and focus on the US was based on a few things. I think firstly, when we first spoke, we were all these small, tiny startups trying to figure it out, which means you have very limited resource. Even funded or not funded, at the end of the day, you have to say no to certain things, and you have to make your bets, and you have the ability to take risk earlier stage, because that's the whole point. You're supposed to take a risk, not play it safe. I think for us, it was important that whatever effort we were making was for a market that would be large enough for that effort. And the UK market, firstly, just by the size of the industry, and we're not talking about the assets under management, but we're talking about the size of the market when you're thinking about how is it that we actually would be deploying this product. Oh, it's on per unit. It's based on the number of households. What is that metric that defines your revenue number? The UK was a small market for us. And then the US, on the other hand, it just had the growth expansion. And every time you talk to someone, they're like, oh, prove it out in the UK and then go to the US. And as somebody who's worked in the US, I was like, well, that's really wrong, because what works in the UK won't work in the US. Now, the reason for that, which is to your point, how are they different? The ownership of real estate is very different in the US versus the UK. So the UK has less institutional ownership, and it is what you would call stratified ownership of real estate. There are a lot of individual landlords. I think the average landlord in the UK has 4 homes. I mean, those are the guys who are doing fairly well, but still, it's a small number. Now, in the US, institutional ownership of real estate, which means the ability to actually buy in bulk, and the fact that that stock exists, which is the multifamily asset class, full buildings that are built only for apartment living and for rental, which are owned by one landlord or operated by one property manager. That asset class actually exists only in 3 places. That is in the US, Germany, and Australia. And I know some of the student housing falls within that realm, and the UK is picking up with it in the build to rent, which is multifamily. But the market there is very small. There's only about 300,000 units that are currently under construction. Like, there is no tech company that should be running after that market. It's too small. Which is why you'll see the developers here, they have to build their own tech, because it's just not worth the investment from a small company to go after that market. There is no growth there. You'll end up as a custom shop for them. So our decision to go to the US was based off the size of the market, the ability to expand that market when we actually do get to that product market fit. And then more importantly, I knew the market. So it wasn't something that we needed to completely learn from scratch. We already had a network there. I'd spent 10 years in the US, so there was a familiarity. So we basically decided we'll just focus on that market, but keep to our strengths here where we were doing the tech.
Love that. Yeah, makes complete sense. So you so when you mentioned, obviously you're focused on the problem that you're trying to solve is kind of how how to make real estate operations scalable. That was what you said, right?
Yes.
What does that actually tangibly mean? Like, when we look at AI or when we look at machine learning in that space, what does that actually tangibly mean? What parts of that process do you see as having as AI, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, has the biggest impact on?
So I think AI, machine learning, and I would say machine learning, has an impact on every part. And I think this is a great question, because it's the question of the use case. And I find it hilarious when the industry asks this question, because the use case is still a business use case. It's not about machine learning. So when you say, how do we make real estate operations more scalable? You first need to figure out, well, what is it that we do in real estate operations? And that's where basically there are full businesses that are built off this. What's the first thing you do? Is it acquisition? How do I find my deal pipeline? From my deal pipeline, how do I evaluate it? From that evaluation, how do I do the due diligence of it? From there, how do I take over those leases? From there, how do I operate these properties? What goes into operations? Why do people actually contact us about stuff? Is it only maintenance? Is it not? How do you do a renewal? Like, everything that goes into operating that asset. And if you actually look at a P&L or a pro forma of a building, you'll see very often the rule of thumb is you've got the market rate, you've got a occupancy number or a vacancy rate. From there, you then have your gross expenses, and your NOI number is somewhere close to 50% of the rent that you've technically collected. That means there are things that are being done. Otherwise, what would you be spending on? And a lot of that is linked to like payroll, people that are actually on site, maybe some of them are even off-site, but it still has to get allocated to that specific asset. And then at the bottom of that number come things like, your business insurance, your debt payment, and all of that, when you put it together, tells you that, okay, this is an investment-worthy asset. If you actually go down that list, and then the layer above, which is That's just the asset. Then you have the corporate layer, which is the, asset managers. Each one is then taking fees from the fund. And then there's the layer above that, which is the investment manager. All of that is real estate operations, to be completely honest, because if you're operating a business, you have operations. And where can machine learning make an impact? It can usually make an impact everywhere. The use case has to usually come from the business itself. Like a tech provider should not be the person telling you how to use tech. It's actually your business that needs to be saying, actually, I now see what we can do with technology. I should be rethinking workflow completely, or I should be rethinking the way our organization is set up. So like yesterday, I was having a conversation with a large hedge fund, and we were showing them some of the work we did. And it was very, when you're talking to somebody who is paying attention, when the question is, this is interesting. Can you give me examples of how your clients have now changed how their organization is set up based on the technology you've just shown me? That is a great question, because the scalability of real estate eventually comes down to people aren't scalable. So you have to make a change to your organization. You have to make a change to the way you work. It can't just be a plaster on the side and your organization continues working the way it does. And that's the part where I think the scalability of real estate operations is a beautiful marriage between the customer or the client as well as a tech provider like us, because we can showcase what's possible. But the decision to actually adopt that and then kind of transform your organization based off today, that still falls with it onto the customer, which by the way is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and interesting. I've got so many questions. I'm not even following now the questions that I've got asked. I'm just curious. So where's your view on that? Where I'm interested, and feel free not to answer this, but in terms of the sales process for you right now, how much of that is like, pushing on kind of an open door and people want and understand the value of AI already, or machine learning, they understand the value of it all, and they're kind of just like, what can you do for me, versus there's the kind of the hardcore kind of, first of all, explaining what the value is.
Yeah.
So there's the education piece and then getting it. I'm interested to know what that's like now, given obviously AI is everywhere. Previously when I was doing it, it was a real pain. You had to be like, what is it first? But yeah.
I know when we were doing it, I think we both said, I'm not going to tell you what it is, just do you need it?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there are three parts to it, because I think actually what you said, all three. So the educating part is really important, because the product in general, technology adoption has a curve, right? There'll be the early adopters, then there's the guys in the middle, then you get the mass hysteria and everybody coming through the doors, and then there'll be the laggards. And you have to go through that bell curve. I don't think there's any company or any technology that doesn't have to go through it. And your sales process has to basically attack each one of those. Now, there's certain parts in your sales process where it will get more heavy. So, for example, when I'm trying to think what's a good use case. CRMs are a great use case, like Salesforce, right? When they first started, very similar to AI, it would be nobody really understands why I need this. And at that point, you'll have the early adopters, the people who kind of get it. And at that point, what you're doing is you're taking that group of early adopters, people who understand it, who get the vision. And from there is that educating the market part that becomes really crucial. Now, I would say there is still a very large chunk of the market that is there. However, people don't like to learn. You can't just knock at their door and say, I want to teach you something. Like, there's no reason for them, unless you're just sitting at a conference because you want some coffee. But like beyond that, the reason to learn needs to exist. And I think that's where the sales process right now is in a great place. So there have been certain use cases which have been successful for the industry. So at least where in the US, there have been like leasing chatbots that have done fairly well. There have been certain use cases with regards to data warehousing that have done really well. And most of them are precursors for those early adopters understanding that they need to make that data useful to do anything. So they've been kind of going through some ideas and singular use cases. That allows people to be curious, and that is when they knock your door. So that's when they're going through traditional competitor analysis. If I'm now looking for something, what else is out there? And that for us from a sales perspective it's the foot in the door, which allows us to now pull them back and say, well, now let me explain to you and give you a little bit more of education of what else you can do and why you can do it. So I think the sales process has now evolved to a point that you're not just going and shouting at people and saying, look, I've posted this information about AI, but I don't really know if you're interested. The interest level is definitely there because there are singular use cases and there's usually point solution use cases. It could even be like a use case of a CRM. We're suddenly interested in a CRM. And that's just, oh, interesting. You're now interested in your customer data. That's what you're saying. Let me now educate you a little bit on, because now they're more receptive to that education. I think in general, that's where the industry's at today. They're more receptive to educating. It's not as closed as it was a few years ago, where they weren't really sure why some people were bothering with it. And then they do have one or two use cases where they can showcase that this is worth considering. I don't think the mass hysteria is there yet, mostly because that education hasn't yet gotten people to a place where the organizations are ready. So I do think a lot of people will fail in a lot of their experiments right now. And they're also going through a build versus buy because there seems to be a bit of naivety about everything's an OpenAI wrapper, which it isn't. And if you're using it as an AI wrapper, at some point, things are going to stop working for you. And I think the definition of an AI wrapper has already changed in the last 3 months. So I think there's a lot there that's still to happen. But frankly, when somebody clicks and they get it, that sales process is very quick. But where it clicks is always C-suite. I think we need to just accept that point solutions and singular use cases will be fine if you're going on somebody in a department is looking for a single thing to help them out and they want to use AI. But that is not going to have the impact on your organization the way that currently the technology stack can. For it to have the kind of impact, which is frankly going to be the difference between people who can scale and who can't scale, which eventually will be the difference between people who succeed and can't succeed. I think that's coming from C-suite. And the minute you have those decision makers who look at it as a holistic organizational change, actually it moves very fast. Decisions get taken very fast. And actually you see them engage in their new way of doing, and it becomes very normal to them. And that group will then end up leading the rest of the industry because they'll see them succeed. So I think it's still, you're just playing that product adoption game, but you have to have a sales tactic for every part of it. You can't ignore one. Like you can't say, I'm not going to educate them, I'll just wait for them to come. That also isn't going to get you anywhere.
I mean, that's really interesting as well, because part of that is, as you adopt any new AI tool, what I'm hearing from you, and I would kind of identify the same thing, is obviously certain tasks that people have done as part of their roles historically are suddenly now those tasks can be kind of automated and moved on, but that means that the jobs, their whole roles need to slightly adapt and change. So what I'm interested then is, like, obviously you're in technology, you're selling a technology product, but to what extent do you think now that starts to bleed over into almost kind of organizational change, right, as part of that as well? So how much of that is a challenge for you, I guess?
So organizational change is the largest challenge. And the thing is, we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we tried to take the technology that's available and try to fit it into the organization that exists today. It's a little bit like, when people used to work with forms and then that same form got converted to a database. But that's not how databases should be used, because they can do more. And I think there will always be this balance of, like, how true do you stay to the purpose, which is, if the purpose is the scalability of real estate and you ask me to fit within the organization and say, no, I just want. I always think the word just want is very problematic. The minute you hear that on a call, you're like, okay, this is not one where they're ready for a discussion. It's I just want this one solution, which means you're looking for a band-aid. You're actually not looking for a solution. And I think it's that just one part, which is the organizational change part. Now, I think what I've realized about our team is we're slowly turning, the technology part is fine. It's easy now, we've gotten to a stage where developing it is great, but you're almost becoming consultants. and you're walking into the room. I think I read this somewhere. Somebody gave me this metric. I think Deloitte or PwC booked over 3 billion in revenues for
I saw that, yeah.
for AI consulting to give people their plan on how to use AI. Their revenues are higher than OpenAI's revenues.
Yeah,
And if you think about the amount people are willing to spend on just trying to figure out what to do with it, and what we've realized, and I was almost like, wait a minute, we do this for free to give people a software as a service solution, which they're constantly wondering whether what's going to be, can you give me the ROI calculation on it? I was like, we should just charge them consulting fees and leave the technology for free, because at this point they're willing to pay for somebody to tell them what to do with it than the actual technology. And I think that's really interesting. And I think for us, what we have realized is anytime when we go into our clients' offices, we do have to work as consultants with them. And in a way, you're redesigning how they will operate. You're redesigning in a way what their organization should feel like. And I think that's where the challenge always lies, because at least our industry is not used to vendors behaving that way. It's a RFP driven industry. They're used to vendors doing just fill out the form, give me your lowest rate, and then we'll kind of figure. Whereas if you're working with a consultant who's also a tech provider, where the tech is your solution, you wouldn't treat them that way. So I think there's still a bit of recognition that is yet to come, that your true technology partner is not the RFP partner. Your true technology partner will be your thinking partner. And I think that is where we've had to also position ourselves, where you just say, this is the value we bring. And if that is extremely valuable to you, we should work together. But it's hard. And I think what would be easy is actually to just say, here are these little point solutions. None of them actually will give you a big organizational change. But hey, marketing's budget is there, and marketing can say they put a chatbot on the website. And then, we can put a press release about it. But I think that would be dishonest to our mission. So it really depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, agree. And interesting to get your take. I mean, we talked about it a little bit. The last bit from me, I guess. Well, not quite the last bit. I've got one more question as well.
Okay.
But in terms of the ecosystem problem as well. I mean, certainly when I was doing it there, it was not a particularly hospitable ecosystem back in the day, to say the least. And it's probably different in the US, but certainly in the UK, every different company we approached had a different system, or had a different. It was honestly a pain, and most of those systems never talk to anything. So to try and get data off and back in is a pain. How is that changing now? Is that still the case? Is there still problems there? What's that like?
Yeah. I mean, that is awful. I don't think I can't use another word for it. It's awful. However, yeah, things are changing there. I think that this is one of the other reasons why we were very happy to go to the US, because especially working with some of the clients that we work with, they are large owner operators, and they're ambitious. It's they're looking at, they may have 100,000 units now, but their ambition in the next 5 years is to, okay, we're going to raise a lot of money, and we're actually going to go and manage 300,000 units. And that ambition then aligns with kind of, what we're doing. Clients like that have very quickly realized that their data was at risk. And they first have taken the decision to build data warehouses. And I think that has been, and I'm really glad we started our journey when we did, because we had these conversations early enough with some of these clients who right now are at such a great point. Like, we've been deploying stuff with them at such pace because they've got data freedom. And we use this quite a lot in Traptus. Like, it's one of our pillars, like data freedom. Like, how do we get people data freedom? And most of that is coming from the change in the attitude that our data is important, so it should not be stuck with a vendor. Because data is an asset, it should be something that the client actually pays attention to and invests in, because you invest in assets. And if you think of your data as an asset, suddenly you don't think of it as an expense. You think of it as something that needs investing into. And they've invested into putting data warehouses. Are they great? No. But also a lot of the PMS systems, like, the different ones, they will be more open to their clients pulling their own data than trying to work with, vendors for a few reasons. They don't want to have to support it. There are also different versions of it. Everybody's got custom versions of their PMS system. Like there's all kinds of hell, which I think the first place where we have seen the change is just clients being a lot more proactive, the large ones. The ones who are not that large and do not want to put that investment into it, I think in their case, what we've realized is they're also, if you're not that focused on your data, that actually also means that they're quite comfortable moving between vendors. You just have to make the case of doing enough for it. So in that case, you just have to feel comfortable to make that recommendation and say, look, you're doing XYZ with this vendor. But if we're going to be pulling this information from you, we just need to then change your user behavior. And while you're making that change anyways, so like, for example, a lot of clients we talk to, they're doing centralization efforts. Like you're anyways going to retrain your team to do something because you're changing the way the organization does. So let's make that change now. So I think some of that is also when you position yourself to be the change, and that's a matter of like using a new system. But I think any tech provider has definitely faced the issue of integrations. And frankly, what I've realized is very often you have to push back on the client and ask, why do you want that integration? Because it's sometimes a checkbox. Like I've heard sometimes they say, oh, can you write this back to that system? And I was like, why? And I was like, oh, I was like, tell me the workflow that's in the back why are we writing that back to the system? Where are you going to look at this information? What if we gave this data to you anyways? Why does it have to go back? And I think very often they don't know the answer to that. So I think for customers, every time when they ask for integrations and use it as a blocker, if they truly do want to do something, they should be able to answer the question as to why. But it's painful. I actually think it's only on the industry now to recognize data is important, and they should be pushing back on any vendor and saying, if my data is trapped with you, I don't work with you. And that'll automatically make a change. But it's happening in the States. There's a lot of large companies who are making that as part of the RFP. If there are not available APIs, and if there is not a daily extract, or in fact even a short-term extract, like what's the point of a daily extract? You want the extract coming as quickly as possible. So the freshness of the data and data freedom is actually slowly creeping its way into RFPs.
Yeah, 100%. That was the biggest frustration. It's people, not asking exactly that kind of how do I get the data off, and kind of, because every company from my experience, tech company, will say they have an API, but there's APIs and there's APIs.
That's right.
You've got to really drill into those questions. But anyway, that's super great. So I'm just going to kind of wrap it up. What advice would you give to maybe anyone coming into the sector, either on a corporate side or a startup side, I guess, looking at AI for real estate? What would be your kind of advice, thoughts? Could be anything.
I think in terms of advice, the only thing anybody coming in either into the PropTech sector or on the operator side, understand what the business does, not what your role is and not what your department is. Like, just understand what is the business case of the business you've just joined. And same for if you're on the technology side, what does the industry actually do? What I've seen is most people get so stuck in their job, their role, that very often they're not thinking for the business. And if they're not thinking for the business, I can guarantee you they will not know how to use AI. Because they will only have such a small perspective of those use cases that everyone will ask them the question as to, is it worth it? And they may come back and say it's not, and they're wrong. It's because they're not looking at actually the way that the business is structured, and the business has been structured that way because they've worked historically. If somebody's coming in new, you have the ability to actually think and look at it with fresh eyes, and those fresh eyes are quite important. Now that can be dangerous as well. You don't want to be the person walking into a job for the first time and saying, I have a new vision for the business. But to the right audience, you would be really important. And this comes back to any time. It doesn't matter. It's about AI or technology. Anybody who starts at any job, not understanding what the business is, will always restrict them. Like that's the difference between somebody getting stuck in mid-management and actually making it up all the way to C-suite. And I think that's the one thing that's becoming really crucial. If your resume or your interview was like, oh, I want to really look into how machine learning can help solve problems, and you have no idea how the investment memo is actually created and what are the different components that go into it, and actually you're coming at it as just like, I'm going to go and streamline maintenance. You can use streamline maintenance as a singular use case, but if your vision does not go beyond how that all applies to the business, it's really quite useless. And I think that's the only advice I would say. Like, I think right now the people who matter are the ones who can see the forest and not the trees. And very often we're asking the people in the trees for their advice.
Yeah.
And it's just, and the last 10 years and the last 15 years for real estate have been a very easy period because it's been very cheap financing. So, and I always say this, like if your last 15 years experience is coming from a completely different environment, it doesn't mean it applies to the next 15 years. So I don't think we should, even if you're not new and if you're old at your job, I don't think you should assume that the way you've been doing it is right, because the market's completely different. In fact, it's an opportunity for everybody to say, how would I do it today? Like if today was day one. And if they're still having that business context, they'll probably get to the uses of machine learning very quickly, and they'd be picking up the phone and calling people like you and me with urgency, not oh, how sweet, they must be doing something fun, let me learn a little bit about it. This isn't about learning. I mean, at this point your house is on fire. If you're not picking up the phone and getting folks like us in front of you, I mean, frankly, we don't want the call either.
Awesome. No, it's been a really fun chat. Thanks so much for taking the time. Do you want to get like give a little cheeky sales promo if you want to drop a last
No.
one in? No bother. Don't call you.
No.
No one call me.
I don't need a cheeky sales promo. I think my only sales promo is like, if you want to scale your real estate operations, I don't think there's no one else to call. But I don't think we need that. Frankly, I think the only promo I would say is, again, think about the business, think about the technology, and then make the right decision for your business. And in that way, you'll find the right partners. And chances are folks like you and me will show up on that list.
Love it. Thanks, Tripty.
No problem.